The night everything changed, Victoria Sterling adjusted. Her black uniform for the third time as she walked through the marble corridors of the Bellagio's executive floor.
At 19?
She had already learned that life rarely offered second chances, especially not to girls like her, the daughter of a single mother battling stage 3 breast cancer. Victoria had dropped out of community college 6 months ago when the medical bills started piling up like autumn leaves. The hotel's night shift paid better than most jobs available to someone with her limited experience. She cleaned the luxury suites, served drinks to high-rolling guests, and kept her head down while wealthy strangers lived lives she could only imagine. Tonight felt different, though she couldn't explain why. The man behind the headlines, her supervisor, handed her a clipboard with room details. Penthouse suite tonight, Victoria, VIP guest. Be extra careful with this one. The name on the paper made her pause. Jonathan Blackwood. Even someone who barely followed business news knew that name. The heir to Blackwood Industries, a financial empire that controlled everything from tech startups to renewable energy, is 26. He was already worth more than most small countries. Victoria had seen his photo in magazines left behind by hotel guests. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes the color of storm clouds. The kind of man who belonged in boardrooms and charity galas, not in the same world as a girl who counted quarters for bus fare. Behind closed doors, when she knocked on the penthouse door, carrying a tray of premium whiskey and crystal glasses, she expected to find a party, or at least a crowd of business associates. Instead, she found Jonathan Blackwood alone on the balcony, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked up when she entered, and she was struck by how tired he seemed. Not physically exhausted, but worn, down in a way that money couldn't fix. "Just set it on the table," he said quietly, his voice lacking the arrogance she'd expected. Victoria moved efficiently, arranging the glasses and ice bucket. She was almost finished when he spoke again. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Guests rarely asked personal questions. "Victoria, sir. Victoria?" He tested the name like he was trying to remember something. "How old are you? 19? Alona?" Nodded slowly, then gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you sit with me for a moment? I'll pay you for the time." Every instinct told her to politely decline and leave. Wealthy men who asked hotel staff to sit with them usually wanted something she wasn't willing to give. But something in his voice stopped her. He sounded lonely in a way that reminded her of her mother during the worst nights at the hospital. "The weight of expectations. Do you know who I am?" Jonathan asked after she'd reluctantly taken the seat. "You're Jonathan Blackwood." "That's the name, yes. But do you know what that means?" Victoria shook her head. "It means I've never made a decision for myself. Not one that mattered." He poured himself a drink, but didn't touch it. "Tomorrow morning, I'm supposed to sign papers that will finalize my engagement to Catherine Morrison." "Do you know who she is?" "The Morrison Hotel heiress." "Among other things, our marriage will create the largest hospitality and real estate merger in North American history. My father has been planning it since I was 15. Victoria frowned. "But don't you love her?" Jonathan's laugh was bitter. "I've spoken to Catherine, maybe a dozen times in my life. We're strangers who happen to be useful to each other's families. The impossible proposal, I'm telling you this because I need help. And I think you might be the only person in this city who has nothing to gain from my family's money." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "I don't understand." "There's a clause in my grandfather's will. If I can prove I had intimate relations with another woman before the wedding ceremony, the engagement becomes void. It was his way of giving me an escape route, though he probably never thought I'd use it." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Victoria felt her cheeks burn as she understood what he was asking. "Sir, I can't. I know how it sounds. I know what you must think of me." Jonathan leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to help me avoid destroying both our lives." The mother's shadow. Victoria thought of her mother, sleeping fitfully in their tiny apartment across town. Elena Sterling had worked 3 jobs to give her daughter a chance at something better, only to have cancer steal that future away. Medical bills were crushing them both. Victoria's hotel salary barely covered the rent, let alone the experimental treatments that might save her mother's life. If you help me, Jonathan continued, I can help you. I've seen how you look. At the medical bills you carry in your purse, I know about your mother's condition. Victoria's heart stopped. How do I make it my business to know things? It's how I've survived in my family this long. His voice softened. I can ensure she gets the best treatment available. Number. Questions asked, no strings attached beyond tonight. The choice that changed everything. Victoria stared at him, her mind racing. She'd grown up believing that her body was her own, that she'd give it to someone she loved when the time was right. But love was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when her mother's life hung in the balance. You're asking me to sell myself, she said quietly. I'm asking you to save us both. The silence stretched between them. Outside, Las Vegas glittered like a promise that never quite delivered. Victoria thought about her mother's thin hands, the way she tried to hide her pain during chemo sessions, the quiet dignity with which she faced each day, not knowing if it might be her last. If I do this, Victoria said finally, what happens afterward? You just disappear? I give you my word that your mother will receive the best care available for as long as she needs it. And you'll never see me again, unless you want to. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Long night. Victoria nodded slowly, sealing both their fates with that simple gesture. What followed was nothing like the romance novels she'd read as a teenager. It was awkward and tender and desperate all at once. Jonathan was gentle, almost reverent, as if he understood the magnitude of what she was giving up. They didn't speak. Much afterward, Victoria lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Jonathan slept beside her. Both of them suspended in the strange space between strangers and something more intimate than lovers. When dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky, in shades of gold and pink, Jonathan was already dressed and preparing to leave. He placed an envelope on the nightstand. The first payment for your mother's treatment, he said. There will be more. Victoria sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. What happens now? Now I go break an engagement and you go save your mother? This morning after, he paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. Victoria? Yes, thank you. After he left, Victoria sat alone in the empty suite for a long time. The envelope contained enough money to cover her mother's next 3 months of treatment, along with a business card for a top oncologist in Los Angeles. She had given away something precious to a stranger. But she had also given her mother a chance to live. As she gathered her things and prepared to return to her regular life, Victoria made herself a promise. She would never regret the choice she'd made in that room, but she also swore she would never see Jonathan Blackwood again. 3 weeks later, the news broke that Jonathan Blackwood had called off his engagement to Catherine Morrison, citing irreconcilable personal differences. The financial world buzzed with speculation, but no one ever discovered the real reason behind his decision. Victoria, meanwhile, was dealing with a different kind of life-changing news. The pregnancy test she'd taken in the bathroom of a gas station showed 2 pink lines that would alter the course of her future in ways she never could have imagined. She was carrying Jonathan Blackwood's child, and she had no intention of ever telling him. 10 years of silence. Victoria Sterling had built her life in Bend, Oregon, like a fortress made of routine and quiet determination. The small mountain town was everything Las Vegas wasn't: peaceful, predictable, and blissfully uninterested in the business dealings of billionaires. She worked as a librarian at the local elementary school, lived in a modest 2-bedroom house with a garden she tended on weekends, and raised her son Daniel with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had learned early that the world could be cruel to those who trusted too easily. Daniel Blackwood Sterling. Though he only knew half his name, was everything beautiful about both his parents, wrapped into one extraordinary 10-year-old boy. He had his father's storm gray eyes and sharp intellect, combined with his mother's quiet strength and stubborn independence. While other children his age were obsessed with video games and cartoons, Daniel spent his free time reading financial newspapers and teaching himself coding languages. The curious mind. Mom, what's a hostile takeover? Daniel asked one evening over dinner. Looking up from a business magazine he'd borrowed from the library, Victoria nearly choked on her pasta. Where did you hear that term? It's in this article. About Blackwood Industries. They just acquired 3 tech companies in what the writer calls aggressive expansion. I think it's fascinating how one company can absorb others like that. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. For 10 years, she'd carefully avoided any news about Jonathan Blackwood or his company. She'd built their life in deliberate ignorance of his world. But Daniel's natural curiosity was making that increasingly difficult. Daniel, maybe you should focus on books more appropriate for your age. But Mom, this stuff is like puzzles, and you know how much I love puzzles. His gray eyes sparkled with enthusiasm that reminded her painfully of someone else. Did you know that Blackwood Industries started as a small investment firm and grew into a multi-billion-dollar empire in just 2 generations? The current CEO is only 36, and he's considered one of the most innovative business leaders of his generation. The discovery that night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Victoria found herself doing something she'd sworn she'd never do. She looked up Jonathan Blackwood online. The man who appeared in recent photos was older, more polished, but unmistakably the same person who had shared that desperate night with her a decade ago. His dark hair now had silver threads at the temples, and his eyes seemed harder, more guarded. She read about his successful leadership of Blackwood Industries, his charitable foundations, and his notably private personal life. There were rumors about various relationships, but nothing serious, nothing lasting. No wife, no children that the public knew about. What Victoria didn't know was that Daniel had been conducting his own research, using the school's computers during lunch breaks to dig deeper into the business world that fascinated him so much, and Daniel, with the methodical mind of someone far older than his years, begun to notice patterns. The connection had started with a photograph. Daniel had found an old shoebox in his mother's closet while looking for extra blankets, and buried beneath insurance papers and old receipts was a single picture, a man standing on a hotel balcony. His face partially turned away, but his profile unmistakably familiar. Daniel compared that profile to the professional headshots of Jonathan Blackwood he'd found online. The angle of the jaw, the way the man held his shoulders, even the shape of his hands resting on the balcony railing, it all matched. But it was the dates that confirmed his suspicions. The timestamp on the photograph read March 15, 2014. Daniel's birthday was December 3, 2014, exactly 9 months later. The investigation for 3 weeks. Daniel conducted his investigation with the precision of a seasoned detective. He noted his mother's careful avoidance of certain news stories, the way she changed the channel whenever Blackwood Industries was mentioned, the fact that she'd never once told him his father's name despite his repeated questions over the years. He also began to notice things about himself that he'd never considered before. His love of numbers and patterns, his intuitive understanding of business concepts, even his habit of tapping his fingers in specific rhythms when he was thinking. He'd seen Jonathan Blackwood do the exact same thing in a video interview. The final piece of evidence came when Daniel overheard his mother on the phone with her friend Rebecca, speaking in the hushed tone she used when she thought he wasn't listening. "Some days I wonder if I made the right choice," Victoria was saying. "Daniel asks about his father constantly, and I don't know how much longer I can keep deflecting. He's too smart for his own good. You did what you had to do, Vic. You gave that man his freedom, and you protected your son from a world that would have torn him apart. But what if he deserved to know? What if Daniel deserves to know who his father really is?" The plan, that conversation, crystallized something in Daniel's mind. His mother had made this choice out of love and protection, but he was old enough now to make his own decisions. He began planning with the same careful attention to detail that he applied to everything else in his life. The Blackwood Industries Annual Innovation Summit was being held in Portland in 2 weeks. It was open to the public, and Jonathan Blackwood would be giving the keynote address. Daniel had his mother's old laptop, a basic understanding of public transportation, and a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. He told his mother he was going on a field trip with his advanced placement group, a lie that made him feel sick but seemed necessary. Instead, he took the Greyhound bus to Portland, using money he'd saved from odd jobs around the neighborhood. The moment of truth, the convention center was massive and intimidating, filled with adults and expensive suits talking about market trends and investment strategies. Daniel felt small and out of place, but he pushed forward with the determination his mother had instilled in him. When Jonathan Blackwood took the stage, Daniel felt his heart slam against his ribs. Seeing the man in person was different from photographs or videos. There was an energy about him, a presence that filled the room and commanded attention. And when those storm-gray eyes swept across the audience, Daniel felt like he was looking into a mirror that showed him. 26 years into the future, during the question and answer session, Daniel's hand shot up before his brain could stop. Him. Jonathan's gaze found his in the crowd, and for a moment time seemed suspended. "Yes, young man." Daniel stood slowly, his voice clearer and stronger than he'd expected. "Mr. Blackwood, my name is Daniel Sterling, and I believe you're my father." The aftermath, the silence that followed, was deafening. Camera phones emerged from pockets, reporters leaned forward in their seats, and security guards looked uncertain about how to handle a 10-year-old boy who had just dropped a bombshell in front of hundreds of witnesses. Jonathan stood frozen at the podium, his composed expression cracking for just a moment. In that instant, Daniel saw something flicker across the man's face. Recognition. Perhaps, or just the dawning realization that this wasn't some elaborate prank. "I think," Jonathan said carefully, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, "this conversation should continue somewhere more private." The confrontation, the backstage area of the Portland Convention Center, felt like a different world, insulated from the chaos Daniel's announcement had caused in the main auditorium. Jonathan Blackwood sat across from the boy who claimed to be his son, studying him with the intensity of a man trying to solve the most important equation of his life. "How did you find me?" Jonathan asked quietly. Daniel straightened his shoulders, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. "I'm good with patterns. You look like me, or I look like you. Plus, the timeline matches perfectly with when my mom lived in Las Vegas. Your mother." Jonathan's voice caught slightly. "Victoria Sterling. You remember her name?" "I remember everything about that night." Jonathan leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "Daniel, what exactly did your mother tell you about me?" "Nothing," Daniel admitted. "She's never said your name, never talked about what happened. But I'm not stupid. I can see how sad she gets sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking. I can see how hard she works to give me everything I need while pretending she doesn't need anything for herself." The phone call. Jonathan's phone buzzed with urgent calls from his assistant, his publicist, and what sounded like half the business world. But he ignored them all. Instead, he made the call he'd been avoiding for 10 years. Victoria answered on the third ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Daniel, you should be in school. Why are you calling from an unknown number?" "Victoria, it's Jonathan Blackwood." The silence stretched so long that Jonathan wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Is my son? He's with me. He's safe. Victoria, we need to talk. Bring him home now." "I will. But first, I need to know why you never told me." Another long pause. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was stronger, edged with the protective fury of a mother whose child had been put at risk. "Because you made it clear that night was about your freedom, not about building a family, because I wasn't going to. Be the woman who trapped a billionaire with an unexpected pregnancy. And because I knew your world would eat us both alive." The return Jonathan drove Daniel back to bend himself, the 3-hour journey passing in a mixture of awkward conversation and comfortable silence. Daniel peppered him with questions about business strategy and investment theory, while Jonathan found himself marveling at the boy's intellect and his uncanny ability to cut straight to the heart of complex problems. "Do you regret it?" Daniel asked as they neared Bend. "The night you met my mom?" Jonathan considered the question carefully. "I regret a lot of things about how I handled that situation, but I could never regret something that led to you existing." When they pulled into Victoria's driveway, she was waiting on the front porch, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She looked older than Jonathan remembered, but also stronger, more confident in herself and her place in the world. "Go inside," she said without taking her eyes off Jonathan. "We'll talk later. But Mom, inside, now." The reckoning once Daniel had reluctantly disappeared into the house. Victoria stepped down from the porch, putting herself on eye level with Jonathan. The years fell away, and suddenly they were both young and desperate again, to people who had made an impossible choice that changed everything. "You had no right to take him without telling me," Victoria said, her voice steady, but her hands shaking with suppressed emotion. "You're right. I'm sorry. When he stood up in that auditorium and said what he said, I just ... I couldn't think straight. He's been planning this for weeks. Should have seen it coming." Victoria ran her hands through her hair, a gesture Jonathan remembered from that night 10 years ago. "He's too smart for his own good. He gets that from you, does he?" "Dies. From where I'm standing, it looks like he gets his reckless streak from his father." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of a decade's worth of unspoken words hanging between them. "Victoria, I tried to find you. After the engagement was called off, I hired investigators, but you'd disappeared completely." "I know. Made sure of it." "Why?" Victoria's composure finally cracked, and Jonathan saw the pain she'd been carrying all these years. "Because I was 19 years old and terrified. Because I knew that if you found me, it would either be to pay me off or to take my baby away, and I couldn't handle either option. The truth unfolds, I never would have taken him from you. Wouldn't you? You're Jonathan Blackwood. You're used to getting what you want when you want it. If you'd known about Daniel, would you have really been content to just send child support checks and visit on weekends?" Jonathan opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. She was right, and they both knew it. The man he'd been 10 years ago, driven by family expectations and corporate pressures, might very well have tried to control the situation completely. "I'm not that man anymore," he said finally. "Prove it, how?" Victoria gestured toward the house, where Daniel was undoubtedly listening from behind the curtains. "By putting his needs first. By understanding that he doesn't need a billionaire father who swoops in and changes everything. He needs stability, consistency, and the chance to be a normal kid for as long as possible." The media stormed. The story broke within hours of Daniel's public announcement. Blackwood heir revealed and dramatic summit confrontation dominated business news. While tabloids ran wild with speculation about Jonathan's secret family and Victoria's mysterious past, reporters descended on Bend like locusts, camping outside Victoria's house and following Daniel to school. Photographers with long lenses tried to capture pictures through their windows, and Victoria's quiet, carefully constructed life began to crumble under the weight of unwanted attention. Jonathan arrived unannounced on the second day of the media circus, accompanied by a security team and a plan to relocate Victoria and Daniel to a more secure location. "We're not running away," Victoria said firmly when he explained his proposal. "This is our home. Your home is under siege, and help me protect it. Don't ask me to abandon it." The choice that evening, as they sat in Victoria's living room while security guards kept reporters at bay, Jonathan made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "I want to step back," he announced. "The public eye from everything that makes our lives complicated." Victoria stared at him. "You can't be serious. I spent 36 years living the life my father planned for me. I built an empire I never really wanted. Married women I didn't love. Missed the birth of my own son because I was too proud or too scared to fight for what actually mattered." Daniel, who had been quietly doing homework at the kitchen table, looked up with interest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I want to be your father, not the CEO who happens to share your DNA. I want to coach your Little League team, help with your science projects, and embarrass you in front of your friends like normal dads do. The new beginning. The transition wasn't easy." Jonathan's decision to step down as CEO of Blackwood Industries sent shockwaves through the business world and triggered a family crisis that made headlines for weeks. His father threatened to cut him off completely, board members questioned his mental state, and financial analysts predicted the company's collapse. But Jonathan held firm, appointing a capable successor and maintaining only enough involvement to ensure the company's stability. He moved to Bend, buying a modest house 3 blocks from Victoria's, close enough to be present in Daniel's life, but far enough to respect the boundaries Victoria needed. The media attention gradually faded as other stories took precedence. Life in their small mountain town slowly returned to normal. Daniel thrived with both parents present, his natural brilliance now balanced by the emotional security of a complete family, even if that family looked different from traditional expectations. The healing one evening, 6 months after Daniel's dramatic revelation, Victoria found Jonathan sitting on her back porch, reading a book about sustainable agriculture. Part of his new interest in environmental conservation that had replaced his obsession with corporate expansion. "He's asleep," she said, settling into the chair beside him. Finally finished his report on renewable energy systems. He wants to design solar panels when he grows up. Of course he does. Jonathan smiled. Yesterday he told me he wants to create a financial system that helps developing countries build sustainable infrastructure. I told him he should probably finish 4th grade first. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge over the Cascade Mountains. The silence between them had evolved from awkward to peaceful, filled with the contentment of two people who had found their way back to each other after a decade of separation. "Jonathan." "Yes. Thank you for choosing us." He reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining like they had that night in Las Vegas when everything was uncertain and desperate. But now their connection was built on something stronger than desperation. It was built on choice. On the daily decision to put love and family above everything else that the world told them should matter more. "Thank you for letting me." Forever after, 3 years later, on a crisp October morning in Bend, Oregon, Victoria Sterling became Victoria Blackwood in a small ceremony attended by Daniel, a handful of close friends, and no reporters whatsoever. Daniel, now 13 and even more brilliant than before, served as both ring-bearer and best man, officially gaining the father he'd sought, and the complete family his mother had always secretly wanted. Jonathan never returned to the corporate world, instead founding a non-profit organization focused on education and environmental sustainability. Victoria continued working at the school library, now expanded to include a financial literacy program for students that Daniel helped design. Their love story wasn't the fairy tale that movies promised, with its dramatic declarations and perfect timing. Instead, it was something rarer and more valuable. A second chance built on truth, patience, and the understanding that sometimes the most important things in life are worth waiting for, even when that wait lasts a decade. The boy who had stood up in an auditorium and claimed his father had given them all the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to finally become the family they were always meant to be. The end.